Hi chat, sorry for the long wait. I wanted to make a video on one feature, but that required implementing another feature, and that also turned out to require another feature, and I got stuck for a long time. Plus I moved. Twice. So this devlog is unrelated to any of those features as a little break to myself. So, welcome back to the land of null and void. This time with 30% more end. This land is my own personal planet. Homestuck is personalized, so each character has their own planet. Usually with enemies to fight, puzzles to solve, and villages to commune in. Eventually we want to add all that in, but first we need to build a framework to generate our lands. I'm JD Draconovix from Dragon & Fox Collective, and we're making a video game based on the webcomic Homestuck. In Act 1, we just had the spherical planet with some stuff on top. I wanted to get the feel for some of the terrain generation tools we'd need, so I got into Blender and made two geometry nodes modifiers. The first one generates an icosphere, and the second moves the vertices back and forth depending on how high the terrain should be. The terrain I wanted to generate should have a bunch of high hills broken up by a bunch of rivers, so they look like a bunch of islands. The way I wanted to do this is with a Voronoi noise, which makes cells in this pattern. The rivers are on the edges between cells, and the islands are the cells themselves. I started by grabbing a Voronoi texture node and setting it to distance to edge, which makes height 0 at the rivers and grows steadily inland. I wanted it to be more extreme, so I threw in a multiplier and a power node to give it a curve. I'm just going to cap it off with a minimum node, which takes the shorter height from 2 inputs. In order to give the land some roughness, I made the second input a noise texture. I'm using the 3D coordinate for the input since I can't use the 2D coordinate of the surface of the sphere without a lot of squishing or stretching. Finally, I wanted some Cs, so I took an arbitrary component of the cells, their radius, and made all the smaller ones, in 3D space, not 2D, perfectly flat with this greater than node and this map range node. Altogether, this is what it looks like. I could then easily place some of the structures I was working on for the next update on the surface. Blender has this handy snap to surface feature that makes this really easy. I'm also using a Blender plugin called Bevy Scheme that lets me add Bevy components directly to objects or meshes, so all the meshes have a Create Mesh Collider component I made, and these points above the structures have spawner components. Then I exported the whole thing as a GLTF and put it into the game. This mesh does two things better than a generated sphere. First, it gives me a more interesting and easier to manage place to test things like movement mechanics. Second, it actually makes the physics simulation more stable. The physics engines I've used hate how big the triangles were on the generated sphere, and it resulted in a lot of clipping. But the stability still could have been much better. Having such a big mesh caused a lot of weird performance issues, and I didn't want to make it smaller or break it up since that would defeat the point of having it in the first place. This planet served me well for several months, but eventually I knew I was going to have to make the final system, being procedurally generated chunks. Plus, I wanted to work on house building mechanics and needed a way to modify terrain. There's pretty much one universal way to create arbitrary terrain in any shape, and that's marching cubes. In marching cubes, we have a grid of points saying how solid they are, and go through them one cube at a time, placing triangles according to one of 256 combinations of solid and non-solid. I stole most of the implementation from Sebastian Legge, so his video's in the description. I started by generating everything on the CPU so that I could combine together generators in a cool and functional way. I was like, oh, it couldn't be that slow, right? Yeah, it was slow. Plus, this is a really good problem for CPUs to solve. Thousands of tiny little processes that can each solve one of the terrain points. So I sucked it up and started learning about compute shaders. Compute shaders are like regular shaders that render stuff to your screen, but they can do whatever you want instead of just displaying stuff. I started by manually asking the GPU directly to solve all my data, but messing with the GPU is so complex and still ended up being really slow due to like needing to render the game or something. I found this crate for Bevy that makes it easy to do compute stuff, but it was causing a bunch of stuttering. Then I remembered Bevy has a built-in compute stuff. That didn't happen. Then I found out that the compute crate from earlier has asynchronicity turned off by default, meaning it was trying to do the entire chunk in one frame, so I turned that on and now it runs buttery smooth. Of course, GPU code is really hard to debug, so I ended up with a lot of bugs that mostly looked like this, and this, and this, and this, and I still don't know what's up with this last one. It's still broken, so it's a feature? It is still really slow too, even if it doesn't lag out our game anymore, so if you know anything about Rust or Bevy compute shader optimization, or just terrain generation optimization at all, give me a ping on Discord. If you're a dev and you want to avoid all this, I put Marching Cube's algorithms into its own crate, so you can copy it from our GitHub and use it in your own projects. With the compute techno available, I tried to move the Blender nodes to GPU code, but now I had an issue. Instead of moving vertices to a certain height, I'm calculating the solidness of space for Marching Cubes to work. This ended up being really easy to account for though. By subtracting the height of the point we're calculating from the height of the height map, it gives us negative solidness above ground and positive solidness below, resulting in a boundary between them. Now that we're in a proper 3D terrain generation environment, I can do some really cool things. I watched and rewatched a video on Minecraft terrain generation by Henry Nyberg, video in the description, to get cheese caves and spaghetti caves. The cheese caves are made by taking some 3D noise and cutting out the top, making round holes. And the spaghetti caves are made by taking two different 3D noises, taking out their middles, which usually give wobbly planes, and cutting out the intersections of their middles, giving squiggly lines. Then I just minimumed those with the height map solidity data, just like I did to cut off the top of the height map's hills. Now we have Minecraft-ish caves to explore and live in. The Minecraft mod Distant Horizons gave me the idea to add in a second layer of low-resolution terrain to view at a distance. It worked, but what also worked was just making the regular chunks bigger. So I stuffed the low-resolution version into a Bevy plugin and then just disabled it so the plugin didn't do anything anymore. The last thing for now was to add back in the structures I made for the old planet. I watched a conference talk by RuneVision, video also in the description, who made this library called Layer ProcGen, that lets infinitely generated worlds have important points of interest with generated paths between them, as well as any other data we might need to generate to affect the terrain. I'm definitely going to make heavier use of this when we have more political systems, but for now I'm just using it to make a layer for generating 6 points of interest on the terrain, 3 villages and 3 spawners, and then minimuming out a cylinder of space above the structure spawn point, and maximuming in a cylinder below to rest on. Now we can safely place structures on the terrain. And there we go, one procedurally generated planet. It doesn't look like much now, but just wait until we add player characters to breathe some life into these world stories. We're also working on dedicated levels to show off different mechanics, kinda like the Croft Manor levels in Tomb Raider, if someone spilled blue highlighter everywhere. There's still more mechanics I want to add first though. To get notified about cool new features, like the questing I said a while ago was going to be next, subscribe to DNFC and join our Discord. You can also try out cutting-edge SBEPIS builds weekly on our Discord by subscribing on Ko-fi, linked in the description. Ko-fi supporters also get to watch devlogs a week early. If you can't help out like that, the source code for the game's on GitHub if you want to help out or compile it yourself. We have a website now, dragonfox.dev, assuming it isn't down again, with a blog that should be getting more updates on YouTube. The devlogs are also watchable there now, and there are RSS feeds for both pages if that's your style. Thanks to everyone who's supported us so far. I now get to show you off in the supporter battle pit. I made an imp model and higher tiers get cooler effects on the imp and a name tag. Although for completeness' sake, when the imps run out of name tags, it randomly generates a new name in gray. I just wanted to build a little cool thing to show my appreciation. See you again, hopefully soon, and thank you for watching.